Hi there, welcome to this build of a 45-inch wingspan Quiver. Now the Quiver is a scaled down version of the iconic 1930s Quaker. Now we're building this Quiver from a great set of plans that we downloaded from the OuterZone website. And if you have a look in the description below, there'll be a link where you can download these for free. Now in the last video we got the tail assembly, so the tailplane, the elevator, the fin and rudder. We got them covered in a lovely Japanese Asuka tissue, and we put that tissue over the top of a laminating film, a 38 micron laminating film. Now the reason we put the laminating film on first is because it gives it much more strength, a lot more than if it was just tissue. Now I'm using a really nice design which is essentially what the original 1936 Quaker had on it, according to the plans anyway. So it's covered now, and what we need to do is we need to start thinking about hinging the elevator and the rudder. When we built these components, we put a slot into the balsa ready to accept the hinge, but now we need to cut the covering film and tissue, and we need to fit the hinges nice and securely. And once we've got that done, we're going to actually glue the rudder and the fin into the tailplane, and we're going to have to remove some of the covering to allow us to get balsa to balsa, so we get a really nice contact. And we're going to need to make sure that we get this lovely and square, because once it's glued there's no going back. So let's have a look at the hinges first. Now we're going to be using these really nice small Dubro hinges which have got pins in them, so they're lovely and flexible. There's very little friction at all. I really like these hinges and they're lovely and strong. That's the Dubro label if you're interested to get some of these. They are, I do really like them. Now we're going to put the hinges into the slots that we've already cut, and the slots correspond with the thickening of the timber here, where we've doubled up the 316, and we've done that on all four structures. And if we look at the framework, I don't know whether you can see that there, but there's just a little bit of a black line, and again we've got a black line there, and that, if I bring that in, hopefully that's in focus, that's where the slots are that we cut in before we did the covering. So now all we need to do is just get a scalpel blade, and we just need to put that slot back in there. And so it's just a case of cutting the tissue and the laminating film. Now we've got the hinges, and the hinges are just a little bit too long. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Okay, the hinges are just a little bit too long for that thickening there. So if we put that hinge in now, we'll probably see the back of it just through this translucent tissue, which I don't think will look very nice. So I'm going to trim the hinges and just make them a little bit shorter, so they are just the length of the balsa and we won't see them sticking out into that space. Now these should just push in. It's quite a tight slot from when I did it originally, but that just goes in very carefully if we're very careful pushing it in, and not squeezing too hard or pushing too hard, just working it in so we don't do any damage. What we're going to do now is I'm going to cut all of these slots. I'm going to trim all the hinges, get all the hinges in, and then we are going to peg these. I'm not going to glue them. They're very small, and the chances are I could get glue into the hinge bit and they could stiffen up a little bit, which I really don't want. I want these lovely and smooth. So I'm just going to put a peg in, which we'll have a look at in a bit. Right, I've now got the elevator nicely hinged, and that's lovely and floppy, just what we want. And giving enough movement. You can see there we've got plenty of movement, and I thought I'd just give you a little bit of advice on how to put these together, or a suggestion. The hinges are a really tight fit, which is absolutely great as far as we're concerned once we've got them together, but it does mean we have to push quite hard and line them up nicely, and the natural tendency is to grip above the hinge like this and to push them together just where the hinge is. But I would suggest that you don't. You pinch them to the side when you're pushing together like this, because if you pinch above the hinge, you're actually squashing the slot and squeezing the balsa down onto that hinge, and it makes it a lot harder to push them together. Much easier if you just take your fingers to the side a little bit and push. Right, I've now got these both hinged and lovely and free, really pleased, so we can put some really small light servos in to operate these. In the past I might have used mylar hinges, but they have a certain degree of natural resistance in them, and it just makes the servo work a little bit hard to get over that resistance. So much better to have free hinges like these where we can have smaller servos, or the servos aren't worked as hard. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to peg these, so I'm going to drill a hole either side of the hinge in the balsa, in the centre of the balsa, and I'm going to knock in a cocktail stick. So they're just normal wooden cocktail sticks, and these are more or less 2 millimeters in diameter. So I'm just going to drill through on my bench drill. I'm going to drill a 2 mil hole each one, and then I'm going to take off the point, because obviously that's not what we want. We want a nice flat end, and I'm going to knock that into the hole, and then I'll just use a scalpel very carefully to just score around the cocktail stick and to break it off, and then just trim it flush, and we'll put on some little bits of tissue just to seal the top. Right, well, I've got my 2 mil drill in my bench drill. I've got a piece of wood with no high spots or rough bits, because we don't want to damage the tailplane, and we're just going to line up this this drill before we start drilling the hole, so we know exactly where we want it. Right, we've got our 2 holes here, and I've already put one of the pegs in because I forgot to press record on the camera, and so I don't have that. So we'll put the peg in this second hole. I've got my cocktail stick and I've sanded the ends flat. I'll put a slight bevel on it just to help it go in, and now we're just going to tap that into the hole. And I've got it on these bits of wood just because I've got the peg on the underside there, so I can't put it flat on the table. And we're just going to knock this in until we hear the tone change and we know it's gone fully in. There, that was it. So now that is in, and what we need to do is just to go around this cocktail stick with a scalpel, and we're not trying to cut it off, we're just scoring it so that we can break it. And if we put the score in, or a cut around like that on all 4 sides, then hopefully it should break. I mean, the last thing we wanted to do is to cut through it at this stage, because if we do, we'll probably cut our finger and we'll probably cut the covering. But now we've scored it around the edge, that should, there, that's just broken off, and it's left it very, very slightly proud. So what we can do now is we can put it back on there. Yep. And that's just smoothed it off on both sides. It's just compressed the end and probably fattened it out into the balsa, so it's got an even better grip. And we can see now that is securely fastened. This is a fairly relaxed, almost free flight model. There's not a lot of stress going on that, but you won't get those hinges out without drilling those out and pulling it. This is a really secure way of attaching those hinges. So I will get the rest drilled and pegged, and then I'll show you how we're going to cover this up. Right, I'm just changing the tactics I'm using for pegging these. I found I put in a couple of them, I put the peg in and then tried to break it off, and it just made the hole a little bit bigger, which wasn't really, because the balsa was so soft, it wasn't really a good way of doing it. So I'm just cutting some pegs that are 3/16, and I'm just checking those against the balsa on the end. That one's just a little bit trimming off, so it's not too proud. And once I've got these pegs, I'm just putting these in like this, and then I don't need to cut them off. It seems to be a better workable solution. There we go. Look, that's just knocked in, and I've taken to putting them on this steel block just to flatten them down, and that's working a lot better than perhaps what I was doing earlier. But to be honest, either technique is fine. Right, I've got these pegged now, and we're ready to just do the final stage, which is just covering up these small peg marks which are a little bit unsightly. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a piece of tissue over the top. Now, first of all, we can put a dab of CA on there if we think it's necessary. I'm not going to bother. These are really in there quite tight. I'm going to put tissue on them, I'm going to put some varnish on them, and I don't think it's needed. And if you put CA on, it darkens them down. It does make them a little bit more visible. So I'm going to leave it. Now I've got some tissue, and I've got just a piece of card. This is a bit of a drinks carton. And I'm going to put the tissue on top of the card, and I'm going to use my hole punch on the largest hole, and I'm going to create some little circles of tissue. Now if we just try and cut the tissue without the card, it doesn't work, but if we just go along now and we just do a load of these, and then we can take them out of the punch. So now we have all these little circles of tissue, and we're going to take our polyurethane. Just move this over so you can see. This is exactly the same polyurethane that we used when we did the covering of the tissue on the wing. So we'll get the polyurethane, a nice fine brush, and what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little bit around the area that's going to, let me just zoom in a little bit. So we put on just a little dab of polyurethane on each one, and then we take one of our bits of tissue, one of our nice little circles, and just drop that over the top like that. Just touch it down, get another one, and then once we've done this, we'll get just a little bit more of the polyurethane and just put that on top. Now this will dry quite quickly, but I don't think we will need a second coat, because we're probably going to give the whole wing another coat of the polyurethane as part of the covering process. But there you go, that's just got that covered now, and that's looking quite nice. You can see, you can still see them, and you'll always see where it is, but you just haven't got that glaring white from the cocktail stick. So I'll get on and do the rest now. Right, we've now got these hinged, pegged, and the peg holes covered, and I'm really pleased with how it's gone. It's still lovely and free. The peg holes aren't glaring, and yet it's really secure, and the same with the fin and rudder. All that's left to do now is to get this fin and rudder assembly glued into the tailplane, and we've got to get that right. So I'm going to set this up on the edge of the bench here. Right, well, I've cut the covering material out of the centre there where the tailplane is going to sit down, and the underside of the tailplane is free of any covering material, so we should get a nice balsa to balsa contact. And we've also got these carbon fibre pegs that will help strengthen it and locate it. Now, to glue this, I'm going to use epoxy, and I've got to be very careful that it doesn't squeeze out too much, but using 30-minute epoxy will give it a chance to soak in, and we can manipulate it, move it to get it in exactly the right place. If we use CA, it might go off very quickly and we'll be stuck if it's not right. So I'm going to sit the tailplane on 2 pieces of 3/8 balsa like that, and there's a peg on the underside here, so we need that balsa to sit it flat on the table, and or to hold it flat anyway. And so we're going to put that like that. We're going to have this right on the very edge of the table, so that when we eventually get the fin in there with the glue, the bottom of the rudder can hang over the side of the table, and we can line it up and locate it properly. Now we're going to have a couple of pieces of balsa on either side of the fin, and we're going to use a couple of my square blocks like that, and once it's glued we will use the blocks just to pinch it and hold it and make sure that it's absolutely square on the table. And don't forget 30-minute epoxy, so we can check it, alter it if necessary, and then we can sit and watch it while the epoxy cures. I've just mixed up my epoxy and I'm just applying this to the jointing area, and we need to be really careful not to put too much on. I mean, if a little bit oozes out, that's fine, it'll help seal the joint, which will be good because we don't want oil and fuel going in there. So but obviously we need enough that it will form a proper joint. The beauty of 30-minute epoxy is you have loads and loads of time to work with it. So I think there's probably enough on there. I just put that down somewhere safe, and I'm just going to put a dab in each hole just to make sure that the holes are well coated where the carbon fibre is going in. And to be honest, those carbon fibre rods are going to add a huge amount of strength to this. Right, well, I've got the glue on both surfaces. Always a little bit nerve-wracking when you're gluing things like this, and we'll just get this together. Like I say, if a little bit squeezes out, it's not the end of the world, because it will just ensure that we have a better seal. There we go. And actually a little bit has oozed out. You can just see on the side perhaps, but actually nothing of any concern, and I'm really pleased about that because it shows that we've got enough in the joint to make a proper joint, but not too much that it's going to make a mess. Now let me just, okay, now that's pushed down and we'll get these big blocks on. The advantage of having big blocks of balsa like this is we can put them near the joint but not close enough that they're going to get glue on them, but the steel blocks we can actually slide up to the fin and hold it in place. Now that looks about right, I think, and just check that that is square. I know I've got square blocks on it, but it's nice to get a set square on it as well, and to eye it up from a distance, because once this is glued we're not going to be able to move it. So I think that's right now. I'm going to leave that for 30 minutes and we'll come back and have a look. Well, we've now got the tailplane finished. We've got the hinges in, they're nice and secure, and the control surfaces are still lovely and free, which is always a relief after fitting hinges. The last thing we want to do is stiffen them up. And we've got the fin epoxied into the tailplane, and that's come out lovely and square and really nice and secure, particularly with those carbon fibre dowels giving a bit of support. So I'm going to draw this video to a close now, and in the next video we're going to be mocking the plane up and looking at the CG and working out where is the best place to install the radio gear and the servos and the battery. So I hope you'll come back and see how we get on in that video, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing how we get this hinged. I'm really enjoying this build of this vintage Quiver. So anyway, thanks very much for watching.